What's happening? 1-2-1-2. We back live again. Riot started TV. We're in the building. It's been a long week. You know, it's been a long year, and we still rumbling. We still taking it to the streets. We still organizing, and we still doing what we need to do. Shout out to all the good people who've been supporting us and checking us out throughout this year. I want to say that actually March 31st, the end of the month, will actually be commemorating our 1 year anniversary as far as Riot started TV. So, you know, I want to just let you all know first that we will have definitely a serious show on that particular date. Gratitude again. We've been pushing along. Our last episode, we had Dr. Wesley Muhammad on. I want to let you all know here first that one of the things that was issued was a challenge to Baba Zach Kondo to come on and talk about, you know, some of the things he discussed in our previous episode. And for the record, Baba Zach Kondo has accepted. Baba Zach Kondo has accepted, and he said he's down for whatever date. So we're waiting for a return from Dr. Wesley Muhammad in regards to coming on board and having that discussion with Baba Zach. The episode before that, we had our good brother Dhoruba Bin Wahad and Jamu Baraka on talking about some of what we'll be speaking on tonight in regards to what's going on in Ukraine and NATO, so on and so forth. What I wanted to do tonight, I feel like I'm under pressure to go harder every time I touch this microphone. So I felt like, you know, I wanted to bring on some legends, you know, and what I want to do tonight is I want to declare that this type of session that we're about to have right here is what I want to deem a master class. And I'm saying master class because so often we talk about folks who are master teachers, and many of the folks that we talk about are master teachers haven't studied jack shit, you know. But tonight I want to introduce you to some folks. One, of course, you know, Dhoruba Bin Wahad, who is a veteran, of course, in the Black Panther Party, veteran BLA member, freedom fighter, etc. And also, I want to introduce to you Professor James Smalls, who is, of course, a legend if you know anything about African studies. If you don't, then you're going to learn tonight. Professor Smalls is a scholar, activist. He's a priest in several different African spiritual systems. You know, he studied extensively with folks like Dr. John Henrik Clark, Dr. Ben, Dr. Jeffries, Ivan Van Sertima, Asa Hilliard, Dr. Wade Noble, etc. When you talk about liberation, if you're not speaking about these two brothers right here, then you think that you're thinking, you know. So without further ado, I want to introduce you all to Professor James Small and our brother Dhoruba Bin Wahad. Dhoruba, we need you to turn the camera on, brother. You good? We ready. What's happening, brothers? How y'all doing?
Good evening, sir. And good evening again to Brother Dhoruba. I was so happy to learn that he was back on this side, even though, you know, we got to always visit the prison camp every now and then, you know. And we go back.
I'm still in prison, huh?
I think when I first met you, Dhoruba must have been around 67. Wow. That's a long time. We done got gray beard, grand hairs, all kinds of stuff. But I like the scholar thing, my brother. But I
Uh-huh.
come from the streets and the gutters and the ghettos. I was in OAU before that. I was an imam. I'm the only one who succeeded Malcolm as imam over the Muslim Mosque King. Went to Mecca before Farrakhan and that whole crew. And then decided that wasn't our thing. And I closed the damn mosque. And so it's signed and sealed.
Yes, sir.
But the academic part is also very good too, because we got to use it right though. If you don't use it to free your people, it ain't worth a dime.
No doubt.
No doubt. No weapon, no tool have any value if it's not used towards freedom when you don't have your freedom. It's simple as that.
Listen, man, Professor Smart coming in the door, kicking it down. You know what I mean? So that's how we do around here. And you heard what he said from the streets. You know what I'm saying? So don't get it twisted. We can go to the you can go to the lecture halls, and if you don't like what's said, then just take it and smile and keep on walking. Like the song
people
goes.
see me and Brother Dhoruba and they think we're a celebrity. We ain't in no damn movie. You know what I'm saying? We're not celebrities. People been trying to kill us for years. Dhoruba know what Orange County 77 precinct LA was in the 70s. You know what I'm saying? I remember their pistols at my head and they boot up my behind. So if you don't understand how that street was back then, you won't even have a clue where we're coming from.
No doubt. And y'all go back, you said since 67.
I think it was 67. I know for sure I'm going to 68, but definitely 67.
Well, I'm gonna ask you: is he the same Dhoruba from '67 now, or what?
Yes, sir. Just a more improved version. Dhoruba was always one of the most serious brothers. I mean, he was just always serious about the work, and he's lived that out. I've known him on this side. I've known him on the African side. Like we're going to talk about Somalia a little bit, and I think we were in Uganda together when we met General Ideed. Back about 85, somewhere back to 84.
Oh, that was damn, man. That was a long time ago. That was before they killed him.
Yeah,
before he died.
His wife and little girl. We all had lunch together. So Dhoruba has been in the war as a soldier since he's a young man, and I hope that I've tried to soldier the best I can since I was a young man. That's the only purpose you have when your people's not free. That's a simple question.
No doubt, no doubt. How you feeling today, Dhoruba? What's going on with you, man?
Like I said, fighting fire with a feather, but it's looking pretty good, man. I just seeing that we start now. I also want to say a shout out to Black Power Radio, Black Power Media. I mean, and the enormous contribution they made. I mean, they did a marathon to raise funds for my medical and related treatment and support. And the fundraiser went off the chain, man. I was surprised and pleasantly surprised. So I just want to give a thankful thank you to all the people that contributed, known and unknown. I really appreciate it, and I don't know. I don't know. I don't have words to really express it, but it was very gratifying to know that people came forward to deal with my situation, especially when we have so many comrades that are passing, and they're in their senior years in the winter of their lives, and many of them don't have the type of support, material, and political support that a younger generation, that our comrades and young folks should be able to provide. So I just want to give my appreciation to Black Power Media for doing a marathon fundraiser, and to Brother Kamal and on Black Power Media, and Dr. My man there, Jared Ball, and so yeah. I mean, all you guys, man. I really appreciate it, man. I don't want to take up one more time, with that, but I just want folks to know that I'm really appreciative, and I hope to stay in the fight. I got some writings that I'm working on now. Hopefully, I'll be able to get them off between now and the beginning of next year, and that it'll contribute somehow to our understanding of the fight that we're in and the type of strategies that we could put forward to do something about it.
No doubt.
So again, thank you to Black Power Media for the support.
No doubt. And that's I've been knowing you for a while, not quite as long as Professor Small, but that's the most sentimental I heard you in all your days. So so definitely, you know, we know you feel it. So
yeah, you got jokes, man.
Hey, that's what we do, man. Hey, don't try to get all serious with me now, man. Come on with that. But anyway, I want to start off. Definitely appreciate you brothers coming on. Professor Small, I want to, you know, right now we know it's a lot going on in the continent, and it's a lot that's not being talked about in mainstream media, and not being talked about amongst nationalists and Pan-Africanists when it comes to what's going on with us. So I want to ask you from your assessment, what's going on the continent, and what's it looking like from your vantage point?
It's looking like war, because young people are beginning to realize what neocolonialism is. It's just colonialism with a dress on, you know? And when we look and see, nothing much has changed. It's like a piece Putin said the other day, and he was talking about the so-called Francophone states in Africa, and he was talking about the situation in Mali with these brothers who had taken over the government there in Burkina Faso, and they're trying to make a break away from French colonialism. People don't understand that France has, 11 African states. They've taken 75 to 80% of these people's gross national product, their income every year, and putting it in French banks. And then said, if you want to borrow any of your money, you got to borrow it from us with interest. And a contract they made when supposedly they were abandoning colonialism, and what it was to put an economic extension on colonialism, which is even beyond classic neocolonialism, where they control the economics while you play flag politics and pretend you got a government. And so there are a lot of young people that are beginning to see this across West Africa. If African countries that now allow France to take their money and bank it would take their money back, the economy of France would collapse. France has no real means of income except the colonial monies they're stealing from Africa. And they've murdered more than 20 plus African leaders to maintain that status since the 1960s. And no one talks about it in this country. No news media, no Negroes in government, or none of them. We have going on now a war in the Congo that's been going on since the 1950s, since the murder of Patrice Lumumba. And I just want to read people, because we know time is short, just to tell you what the war's about. In the Congo, diamond, gold, copper, cobalt, passerite, tin, coltan, oil, timber. Millions of our people have been killed in the last decade plus. No one talks about it. We have a fifth when a few hundred Europeans get killed in a crisis, and no innocent person, black, white, yellow, brown, should be killed by any tyrants anywhere for any reason. And I don't know if that's what's really happening in Europe. I don't know who the tyrant is there yet. I know America and Western Europe makes up the imperial tyrant in Europe. So I have no problem who they are. They're the enemy to even the people who are having issues in Europe right now. And they don't understand what's going on in their own country. But in Africa, those natural resources is what America and the Western world use to keep themselves afloat. And they will kill as many Africans as they can. And the media make sure they either get false reporting or no reporting on what's going on. And so this war that's going on in Congo, they blame it on some rebel groups who are controlling some gold mines or diamond mines and selling illegal diamonds. How can your natural resources become illegal when you sell it? Like that blood diamond stupidity. If white people don't validate your diamond, you can't sell it in the world. And the people in the world go along with this crap. And so if you look at Cameroon, you got a war going in Cameroon since the 1960s. so-called between the Francophone, the French speakers who are controlling most of the country, and the English speaker calling the Anglophone. And they're killing thousands and thousands of people every year. Nobody even reports on it. We don't even know what's going on. And it's over the oil and other natural resources of Cameroon. They have crude oil, timber, cocoa, aluminum, cotton, banana, coffee. We got the war going on in Somalia. That war's been going on since 1991. Well, it really started earlier in the 1960s, but it escalated in I think it was 91 when Bush sent their troops down there, and General Adida and his boys kicked their behind, and Clinton pulled their people out. But they since have put the American troops back in. And the last document Mr. Obama signed before leaving office was the document to continue bombing Somalia. So all the black people who love their little boy need to know he was one of the worst presidents in modern times when it comes to dealing with trying to recolonize Africa. He's put Africom in Africa. They've got something like between 13 and 25 drone bases in Africa. They've got American military running around Africa in civilian clothes doing the undercover, even beyond CIA kind of shit, you know? And it's all about the natural resources of Africa staying in the hands of Western corporations, staying under the control and Western government. In Africa, they have one duty: to make sure that their corporate structure can continue to steal those natural resources I talked about. We talk about Somalia, right? And they always show us desert and starving kids. Well, let's look at the uranium in Somalia, the iron ore in Somalia, the tin in Somalia, the gypsum, the bauxite, the copper, the salt, the natural gas and crude oil. That's what the war is about. Okay? And America, that little civil war, not little, it killed tens of thousands of our people in Ethiopia. Again, that was America. Thank God some of the Ethiopians got on television and say who was financing them and that they had been played. You know, because they couldn't get a government to go their way. Ethiopia always had, especially under the new government, a pretty strong relationship with the Soviet Union in terms of, and a very strong economic relationship with China. And they sought to destroy that with that war in Ethiopia.
So you spoke about one thing you spoke about is the lack of coverage, right?
Right.
As far as mainstream media and most or pretty much all prominent Black media, right?
Right.
What would you say? And I know we're playing cracker's advocate for the sake of folks who are apolitical and who are still American dreaming and feel like Europe's the best thing since cooked food. What would be the reasoning behind the lack of reporting? Because we're hearing about what's going on in the Ukraine. We're hearing about Russia. What would you say the reasoning is?
Well, the reason is what it has always been. If you keep a people ignorant, you can misuse and abuse them. But African Americans don't have any excuse. We have enough media and enough technology in the world. We should all be moving towards some understanding of what Pan-Africanism means. We should all understand what the natural resources of Africa is. We need to learn a history of the great heroes and heroine. I always say history solved the mystery. We sat by and watched them trying to murder Mugabe. You know, they're going to put sanctions on a man for trying to protect this country. And then even African states, they backed the sanctions on a man who was in the bush for decades fighting with a gun to free themselves from colonialism and didn't even kill the colonialists when the war was over. And then got betrayed with his land issue for not killing the colonialists by the white folks, who says, if you let them stay and give them 1/10 of your government, in 10 or 15 years, we're going to pay them and get them out of your country. Well, Mugabe and his people waited and nothing happened, and they waited and nothing happened. And then the American government said, I'm not going to honor the agreement. The British government under Tony, whatever, that fooled them, said they weren't going to honor the agreement. And so they took their land back. And it wasn't just the land. Zimbabwe have a lot of natural resources, gold and diamond being two of the biggest. He took over those industries and said, we're going to process our own stuff here in this country. You're not going to take it out of the ground, process it, and then give us the money. And so they went after Mugabe because some people was looking and said, these people making sense, building a country not based on the American dollar, But it didn't destroy Zimbabwe, thank God. They did almost kill our elders and maybe be the cause of an earlier death than he did have. But he's one great revolutionary we should know. We should learn and understand about Great Sankara, that young boy in Burkina Faso that the Americans and the French murdered, using collaborators like Houphouët-Boigny and others right there in Africa to do it, and see what he was proposing to African people about their freedom. We should look at it, go all the way back, look at Emerson Cabral in Guinea-Bissau. What was he trying to tell us? Where was he trying to lead us? We need to know the history of the freedom fighters and the heroines and heroes of Africa, so we can have a clear understanding who have been fighting to take the slave shackles off of our hands and our brains, and who have been collaborators that we're calling heroes today that's been trying to keep it on.
Right on.
And so it's a question of history will erase the white man's mystery. And we need to be serious about learning not just the history in African America. We don't even learn that well. We don't know who our great heroes here. Dhoruba Bin Wahad, when he told me the other day he was ill in a certain way, he shouldn't have to be. That's a hero. That's a soldier of our revolution. This dude helped to back up the terrorists in the Black communities across this country in the 60s and 70s. And people don't even know his name.
That's right.
But people like me got to keep calling his name. He's my brother. I love him. He's my comrade. I would die for him. I would put my body in between me and wherever the danger is coming from. I'm just sorry I wasn't in Atlanta on that day. But if I was there, I love you, so you know where I'd be. And now the folks that have had the answer, they still got to answer, but we don't talk about things like that.
Right.
So we have to learn to understand why Jamal H. Rap Brown is in prison.
Yes.
And youngsters don't even know his name. Don't know the sacrifice he made for them. This question, history can be used to pacify people, or it can be used to enlighten the people and stimulate them to understand what I'd rather call revolutionary Pan-Africanism now, because everybody and their mama calling themselves a Pan-Africanist, but they have no kind of ideological perspective, no economic foundation and understanding, no political, no cultural, on how to pull the Pan-African thing together. And so we have to challenge even those now who take up the labels of Pan-Africanism on what really is Pan-Africanism and what the efforts towards trying to build it should really be about. And it's about the Africa, the young people are calling it now the Africa we want to see. But we don't want to see an Africa that's European or American in blackface.
That's right.
We want to see an Africa that opposes the tyranny of Western imperialism. Right. People don't even use the word imperialism anymore because most youngsters don't understand it. And you walking on the street selling plastic knockoff while somebody else, big truck full of your cobalt and coltan is passing by you on the road and you trying to sell some plastic cup to get something to eat. Does that make any damn sense?
Not at all. Not at all.
So we have to change how we see history, how we use history. You can't separate history from politics. History should be a weapon of politics. And that politics should be in your favor.
I'm glad you mentioned Imam Jamil Al-Amin, H. Rap Brown.
Yes.
Today, and he's my imam as well, free Imam Jamil. Today actually marks the 22nd year since they framed him, right? March 16th, 2000 on this date right here. So we definitely want to say, free Imam Jamil and free all political prisoners. And that's criminal. Folks like Veronza Bowers, who maxed out in 2004 and is still being held by these bastards. Before I go,
let's make one thing clear. Many of the people we're fighting now are the Black collaborators who got these jobs and these political opportunities because we were out in the streets when we were youth fighting for opportunities. Except the wrong people got in there.
Right.
And they just became Europeans in blackface, carrying out the same policies and sometimes even more brutally than white folks have done in our communities.
Before I go to Dhoruba, I want to ask you real quick because of the fact that you've been talking about the continent, and that's one of the reasons why we've always loved and revered you, because you have not compromised your position when it has come to the motherland, right? So I want to ask you, because we talk about class struggle quite often. How important is culture? How important is African culture when it comes to our liberation? And who can free us?
So culture should be at the foundation of your liberation efforts, because what are we freeing ourselves to be? If I'm something and somebody take me from that thing consciously and make me something else, the first thing I do have to get back to being that thing I was before I was taken away. And so culture is not dancing, it's not drumming, it's not music. Those are tools of culture. Culture is ideology. Culture is your economic, your politics, and your social structure that gives the belief system to a people. Those are ideas, principles, and concepts. But the white man has reduced our culture to the tools of culture, the cloth we wear, the dancing. I wear these beads around my neck, and folks think of it only as though some religion. But each of these beads is an institution. If you know the story of why the color and what it means, it's an institutional dialogue about culture. All right? It's about communal, collective, cooperative. We didn't have to wait for Marx and Engels to be born to understand what communal, collective, cooperative was. That was the foundation of African society. And we need to start looking past the dramatic elements of culture that tries to tell its story. But what is the ideological, philosophical undergirding of culture that is trying to be told? And how do we live that out politically, economically, and culturally?
Right on, right on. Dhoruba.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm thinking, we're talking about Africa, and we can't talk about Africa without the invaders. We know that there have been different invaders throughout history. I want to know the role of Africom on the continent right now. What would you say the role of Africom and NATO is, and the connection that they have right now with the current fiasco that's in the media right now?
Well, one of the things I want to say before I really touch on that is to elaborate on what Professor Small said about culture. I believe Amilcar Cabral said that you can tell the potential for liberation of a people by how much their culture is differentiated from the culture of their oppressor. Those weren't his exact words, but he was saying that the people cannot liberate themselves if their culture is so similar to the oppressor's culture that it's almost indistinguishable. Right. And one of the problems that we have in the diaspora, especially in the U.S., is that we identify almost completely with the concept and the idea of the white supremacist European nation state that we call the United States of America. The United States of America is a racist construct. It was a white supremacist construct from its very inception. So therefore, the racial component that circumscribes and encompasses the class differences in this society are very acute, very pronounced. So I just wanted to say that without a revolutionary culture, it's impossible to carry forward a revolutionary movement, a revolutionary struggle. And so the best that we could hope for in the United States at this particular juncture of American empire, and the United States is an empire, is that we could bring forth a generation of abolitionists who are dedicated to abolishing the strictures of white supremacist power, the white supremacist nature of the national security state, and rather than reform those institutions and make them more palpable to Black people and in our so-called black leaders. But getting on to NATO, and first of all, it's very important for everyone to understand, and I think we've made it clear in previous discussions, and I know it's been made very clear by the sister that I was on the program with the UNIA with her when my computer cut off. The sister ran, Sister Jackie, man, she laid it out about what was happening in Europe with NATO and Russia, and how that would impact upon our lives in the African diaspora. NATO is in Africa along with Africom. Africom is the U.S. Mission in Africa to reconstitute what I call New Age imperialism, to reconstitute the European hegemony. Hegemonic control of the resources of the African continent. The United States is the leading hegemonic power on the planet. And so its military and its arms industry is a multi-trillion-dollar a year affair. So whenever the United States involves itself in foreign policies in the developing world, in Africa, and in Latin America, or in Asia, they always do so with what I call a carrot and stick approach. They use the economic power of the United States, the economic control that the United States has over international institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the international finance industry, to control and direct nation states, smaller nation states, weaker nation states. Professor Smalls pointed out early on about how Britain and the U.S. dealt with Zimbabwe, how they instituted sanctions in Zimbabwe in order to protect the settlers, the white settlers who had still control over the land. I think one of Zimbabwe's major exports was agricultural exports. So the land in Zimbabwe was very important. When you compare Zimbabwe's revolution and anti-colonial struggle with, say, South Africa, you'll see that in South Africa, the ANC was never a revolutionary Pan-African organization as such. It was founded as a fraternity, as an association of lawyers who wanted more civil and human rights for Africans in the European settled state of South Africa. They didn't really initially advocate the complete overthrow and abolishment of apartheid. They just wanted it to be more a liberal, more inclusive. They wanted to ban the residency clauses and the pass laws and all of this stuff. It was a generation that came up after Soweto, the young people who came up and who died in the streets in Soweto and in the massacres of the late 60s that really galvanized and radicalized the ANC and forced it to deal with the total liberation, or begin to deal with the total liberation of Africa, of South Africa. But that was short-stopped, and it was short-stopped by international finance capital, by the mining consortiums and the power of European finance capital. So that the South Africans under the ANC never redistributed the land, never took over the land and the resources of the South African economy. They managed it. They continued to manage it, and under the proposition that to do so would keep the economy functioning, would keep people employed, would not lead to drastic situations, economic situations in distress in South Africa. And it was a big mistake. And we see that in recent years and over the last decades, where the South African government under the ANC, they were killing miners, who were striking. They beat and brutalized African workers in these various industries that were started by the apartheid economy. So we have to really understand that in Africa, African governments and African nations are part of the community of nations. And so once liberation movements get power, once they actually seize power and control of their territory, that's when they're the most vulnerable. That's when they can be co-opted. That's when they could be misdirected. And we see today some of the most reactionary governments on the African continent were former liberation movements. Well, movements that, whether it was in Mozambique or in Angola or in Guinea-Bissau, these were dynamic movements that were led by the likes of Amilcar Cabral, Eduardo Mondlane, Frelimo, and of course Kwame Nkrumah, and other lights of the decolonization process. And so the Europeans, while decolonization was going on, and they were in the backwater of the American empire in many respects. They had to revitalize their economy. They had to create a European currency, and so they created the economic EU, the economic union, the European Union. They created the European Common Market. They created all of the institutions that could solidify their national interests and their national wealth. And one thing that they were all keen on was to control the resources of the South, of the Southern Hemisphere, of Africa, and of Latin America, and of Asia. Of course, the EU therefore knew that it was necessary to have an African policy, just as the United States did. So we have NATO, which was created in, I believe, 1948, around there, or 47, 48. NATO was created to thwart the advancement of the Soviet Union westward. It was created to stop the Soviet Union from spreading further westward after the end of World War II. Many people don't know that the Soviet Union, which is now Russia, were the major forces that defeated fascism in World War II. Mm-hmm. Over 27 million Russians, Soviets, died fighting the Nazis in World War II. This was a traumatic experience for the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. They lost 27 million of their people, compared to the 500,000 or 565,000 U.S. troops who were killed in Western Europe to defeat the Nazis, to defeat fascist Germany. Fascist Germany was divided. Its industries that were headed by the same arms industry the same arms manufacturers that supported the fascists, that supported Hitler and the Nazis, they were never dismantled. Krupp, Volkswagen, the Messerschmitt, all of these corporations, they changed their names, but they didn't change their game. They became the major arms providers for NATO. There were NATO troops stationed in Germany before the Soviet Union collapsed and withdrew from Eastern Europe. And when the Soviet Union did collapse and withdraw from Eastern Europe in the early 1960s, I believe it was 63, they were given assurances that NATO wouldn't move its authority and its geopolitical positions closer to the Soviet Union. That they would not move their military and their influence to the frontiers of Russia. Of course, that promise was betrayed, and when Germany was reunified, it was rearmed, and Poland became part of NATO. The Balkans became part of NATO, Lithuania, Latvia, and those states. And the last remaining state that didn't become part of NATO was the Ukraine. Now, the Ukraine historically, has had many ethnic groups and people in it for hundreds of years. But it was under the Soviet. It was one of the Soviet states under the USSR, the Ukraine. And as we all know, fascism, the major enemy of fascism yesterday and today was socialism, was communism. And so when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in 1941 with Operation Barbarossa, the Ukrainians greeted the fascists and the Nazis as liberators. Many of the Ukrainians, and they formed their own extermination brigades and fascist organizations to fight against the Soviet Union, to fight against Moscow, and fight on the side of the Germans. The same was with Finland and other nations that sympathized with the Nazis. These same nations and these same organizations and tendencies were behind the coup in the Ukraine. I believe it was in 2015, something like that.
Yes.
And the U.S. and CIA sponsored this coup. They put in their crony, and this sent shockwaves through Russia, because Russia had made it clear that the Ukraine and NATO, that there was a certain line that they couldn't cross, and if they crossed that line, it meant war, and it would be a war that would involve and pull in the whole of Western Europe, if not the whole of the West. And of course, they ignored that, and so when we look at what's happening in the Ukraine today, and we see the suffering of the Ukrainian people, we realize that the United States and NATO are willing to fight to the last ounce of Ukrainian blood, to maintain their hegemony and put arms and the military on the borders of the Soviet of Russia. Now, having said that, what effect does this have on us and on Africa? Well, NATO is in Africa. NATO, as I pointed out earlier, NATO was created to stop the expansion of the Soviet Union and the so-called communist bloc nations, the so-called Eastern Bloc nations. But when they collapsed, when the Soviet Union collapsed and withdrew to its own historical borders, NATO didn't disband. NATO, right, in fact, expanded. And the United States initially really didn't have a foothold in Africa the way that the former imperialists did. The United States was seen more as an economic engine. Its imperialism was what I call New Age imperialism. It didn't rely on the military forces. It relied on economic control and the management of debt. So we see that, as Professor Smalls pointed out, the European nations, the members of the EU, were all former imperialist nations. Whether we're talking about Germany, which had its imperial territories taken from it at the end of World War I, or whether we are talking about France, or we're talking about the UK, which just exited the EU, or we're talking about Italy. We're talking about all of these nations. They were all former imperial overlords of Africa, and Belgium, and other nations. They were former imperialist nations, but now under the EU, under the economic, the European market, much of their resources and much of their finance and much of their capital comes from the post-colonial exploitation of Africa. Many of these so-called commonwealths were what that the Anglophone Africans are into, or the Francophone Africans are into. These so-called commonwealths held the wealth of Africa in common. That's what it really meant. It didn't mean anything other than that the Europeans had made sure that the African continent, their elites, their political elites, the ones that they have bought off, could maintain their wealth and their privilege as long as they stayed part of the global economic matrix, the global economic community that evolved after World War II.
But
We need to really
yeah, if you just let me give the people one example of NATO and Africa and all of its viciousness. It's the murder of Muammar Gaddafi and the overthrow of Libya.
Absolutely.
That was NATO and America up front and center.
And what was the incentive for the overthrow of Gaddafi was oil. The Gaddafi intended to take Libyan oil off of the dollar and place it on more eclectic currencies. The EU, you could buy oil, Libyan oil, with a currency other than the dollar. And what we really have to understand in living in America is that that the U.S. dollar is the only currency that's used as a basis for trade in every trade zone. So the U.S. dollar is used to measure oil. It's used to measure gold. It's used to measure every natural resource that comes out the ground that the civilized West relies upon. Is the U.S. dollar. Now the U.S. dollar, of course, is printed in the U.S. It's actually worthless. It's a piece of paper. It's an IOU. There is no gold behind the U.S. dollar anymore since the Bretton Woods Agreement in the 50s. Since when Nixon, I believe it was Nixon, that took the U.S. dollar off of the gold standard. And once it did that, the U.S. dollar globally now substitutes for gold, basically. And what did Malcolm say that was the basis for people's independence and liberation? Land and gold. And so the land in Africa is still being exploited by the Europeans. They have all of these agreements with these Mickey Mouse nations, these elites, these political elites who have grown fat off of white finance capitalism, off of Western finance capitalism, whether it's in Anglophone Africa or East Africa. We have a situation where the political elite in Africa are so much into the pockets of Western imperialism, of Western finance capital, that all they can do is produce raw materials. They don't manufacture anything on the African continent, so therefore the manufacturing class in Africa is suppressed. You have Africa is divided up into trade and economic zones like ECOWAS and SADC, making it almost impossible to have a United States of Africa, and which Kwame Nkrumah said was a prerequisite to the economic union and development of Africa. That the political unity of Africa had to come first, and the economic unity of Africa would follow. And so we don't have a United States of Africa. We don't have an African common market. We don't have an African Afro. We don't have an African currency like they do in Europe. Instead, we have trade zones that have broken up into different areas. And it's in these trade zones that Africom is able to operate, and U.S. Military diplomacy is able to operate. And what the U.S. has envisioned is not to put troops into Africa, but to create bases in Africa and support the logistics of regimes that are in debt to them, that are under their rule and under their control, so that they could determine how the resources in Africa are allocated and how governments function. And so, as pointing to what Professor Smalls pointed out, the long war that was going on in the Congo, in the Cameroon, and now in the Sahel, and the mineral-rich Sahel after the fall of Gaddafi, is that NATO is involved knee-deep in all of these struggles. They're giving advice to the militaries. They're training the militaries in every state from Ghana to North Africa, to Mauritania. Everywhere you go, these individual soldiers that have performed these coups, although they're claiming that they want to empower their people, they all were trained either by the United States or NATO, or along with the Israelis. I mean, the Israelis' intelligence apparatus has been training African governments for the last 2 decades.
So,
and if we recall, in South Africa, before the end of apartheid, the apartheid regime and Israel were partners in nuclear development of atomic weaponry. In fact, Israel conducted many of its tests off the South African coast. It's nuclear tests. And so when South Africa and Nelson Mandela and the ANC took power, they had to renounce any development of any nuclear weapons and nuclear facilities in Africa.
So, Dhoruba, hold your thought real quick, because I know Professor Smalls has I think he has a few minutes left before he has to bounce on. So I definitely, there's a few things I want to get back to with what you're saying, but I want to get Professor Small. You mentioned Nkrumah, and one of the things you mentioned, Dhoruba mentioned, was around African unity being a prerequisite to our liberation. I want to know for you, Professor Small, like, what do you feel about that statement and that concept right now in this particular era, 50, 60 years later? What are your thoughts on that statement?
Well, Nkrumah was right. There's actually going to be a conference, Dhoruba, at this museum in Esokado, secondly, next week, this coming weekend, on that very question. What was Nkrumah right in that statement, or have that statement been proven wrong? I forgot who the speakers are going to be. I'll send you that email, but I want to just read a little statement by Putin. You know, Putin says, if Africa wake up, France falls, and she will lose everything. If Africa decides to exploit their basement, then France and the West will disappear from the great power in the world, because France and the West recognize that Africa, they recognize that without Africa, they're nothing. And then he goes on, dear Africans and Africa, you can develop without any help from anyone, not even me and my Russian nation. And this same Putin, this guy they call him Putin that they want to beat up on, this is one of the Russian military elites who was helping to train our revolutionaries in Mozambique and Angola during those revolutionary struggles as a young man. So he's not new to the issues of Africa and where it stands, especially in the position their people took. And then we come back to Nkrumah. From the very beginning of the OAU, the collaborators and the saboteurs and the Western backers were there. That's why we had the Monrovian group and the Casablanca group. One group was saying, we want a united Africa. The other said, whoa, slow your horses. Let's do it step by step by step. And eventually—
I think the sound went off.
You know?
No, you good.
And so—
Did my sound go off?
No, you still here. You still here.
And so that even today—
Can you hear me?
Yes,
we hear you.
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Hello?
Can you hear us, Dhoruba?
I think I'm muted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you good. We hear you. Do you hear us?
But let me just end this with that even today, sadly, the headquarters is in Ethiopia.
Hello?
In Ethiopia, Haile Selassie was one of the persons that didn't want an immediate United States of Africa.
Right.
And he had sided—
Can you hear me?
Talked about gradualism.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you, Dhoruba. We
can hear you.
Can you hear us? I think you having a problem. We hear you.
Yeah.
We
So
might have to
maybe
lock you back off.
text him and let him know that we can hear him.
Mm.
But when we look, let's go all the way back to the OAU, and you'll see that the same groupings, the same group of nations that lined up against Nkrumah then are those who are lined up against the United Africa now. And we get caught up in a lack of knowledge of history, so we'll raise Haile Selassie to a level of a saint and not see his political immaturity when it came to the unification of that continent. And the power he swayed in not allowing that to happen.
Right.
You know?
And why do you feel he didn't want that to happen? What was it?
He was being supported by the Western enterprise and imperialists, and so was Liberia and the other nations who went along with that, because they know a United States of Africa would mean you can't rob it like they're being robbed now, that you can't kill millions of African women, rape and mutilate them, and not even a damn news story in America about it.
Did anybody hear me?
Yeah, we hear you good. We hear you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Can you hear us?
And so that's important to understand. And so I'm happy that there's enough, not enough, but so many platforms out here now with young Africans from the continent trying to get the story out to the rest of the world. And same here with your show here in the US, trying to tell our story ourselves. Otherwise, we keep buying into the same myth of crying babies, flies eating at their mouth, and they need help from the West, which is a bunch of crap.
Right on.
But it's part of the propaganda of dominance of the mind. That's why history, learning and mastering your history, will erase European mystery. Because what they call history ain't nothing but is mystery.
Right on.
And when we think of what's going on in Ukraine right now, I bet you at the end of the day, you will find the bottom line would be, this is all about Africa. Every war, the First World War was about Africa. The Second World War was about Africa. And most of the European intermittent wars was about how we're going to divide up Africa. Germany got pissed off after between the Berlin Conference, which they called, and the First World War. Germany felt they had gotten the poorest pieces of land in Tanzania and Cameroon and Africa, and all the other folks that got rich. Germany wanted rearrangement. When they wouldn't do it, Germany said, "The hell with you then. We'll take the forests of Poland and deal with the timber. We'll take the Rhine land and deal with the breadbasket, and we'll take the coal fields of France from you." You understand? This was all about natural resources. It wasn't about nobody hating Jews. They've made it that. This was about natural resources. So run a nation. And the same thing comes when we get to the Second World War. After the First World War, the way they divided stuff up again, they cut Germany out of the pie. And Germany said, no, that ain't happening. First place they invaded was North Africa. Nobody even talked about the war in North Africa and the millions of Africans that was killed. The apartheid state was founded as an ally to the Nazi state. Wow. That's why we need to learn history. It'll get rid of the mystery and allow us to do real analysis of our problem in a way that we can solve it. And I'd like to end by just saying, because we were talking about culture and its role. And so I always have a statement, because I learned to do these little cultural statement things because it's important. But there's one I did on culture that I really appreciate. And I just want to read it. It'll take a second. I see my 8 o'clock is burning up the phone, but they're going to wait until we finish. Let me just read this to you, and I think you'll appreciate it, and the people will have it.
Yes, sir.
I said that spirituality guides your life. Culture informs your life. Culture is your primary educational system. It protects you from genocide. It gives you your values, interests, and principles. If you're practicing the culture of those who practice genocide against you, then you will practice genocide against yourself. My brother, I'm going to come back again, and we can give him more time. And brother,
I know you're
going to take it in. You're a soldier. I love you, sir. You don't have to be made up. You are. And your history speaks for you. So y'all have a beautiful evening. Keep teaching the people. Power to the people. Black power.
Yes, sir. We love you, brother. We're gonna definitely look forward to having you back on again soon, because there's so much that we need to touch on. So
Yes,
definitely, we appreciate you sharing what time you had with us.
yes, sir. Peace and
All right.
blessings.
Yes, sir,
Can I
brother.
be heard? Am I being heard? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you well. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, I can hear you now. There was
Okay. All
a
right.
period there I didn't hear nothing. I didn't know what it was.
Hey, man.
But
Yeah.
I'm sure the professor held it down.
No doubt.
I just wanted to just add that the effects of this campaign against in the Ukraine is going to have enormous ramifications for the United States a global economy, and it's gonna change, I believe, the whole paradigm of U.S. hegemony globally, economic hegemony. There's talk about the SWIFT code being used. The international banking system, Russia being cut out the international banking system. But what people fail to realize that China is the rising global power, and that the Chinese have embarked on a massive economic program, investing trillions of dollars into its so-called Silk Road initiative to unify the economies and the natural resources of Asia under a whole new paradigm of economic power that's centered in Beijing, in China. And the Russians realize now that they're cut out completely from the from the Western economic system, that they have a natural ally with the Chinese, and so there's going to evolve a geopolitical paradigm, economic paradigm that will challenge the hegemony of the U.S. and U.S. And the U.S. dollar and finance capitalism in the West, and it's inevitable that that's going to have an impact on us here in the United States, because we are living it. We are consumers. Working people in the United States are consumers, and without consumption, without conspicuous consumption, capitalism really can't provide the type of profits and of surplus labor, profits of surplus from surplus labor to the rich and to the elite. The gap between rich and poor in the U.S. and globally is increasing, and so we have a situation today when we talk about how do we deal with our situation in the U.S., with our situation as a people in the United States, around issues of immigration, around issues of economic control in our community, political power, use of political power in our community. All these things are going to come down to us understanding our role as working people, and our role and the role that we play as consumers. So Jared Ball and his constant attempts to bring the realities of capitalism and finance capital to ordinary people's attention should be bearing fruit now, because we need to understand that black faces in high places, of course, do not represent the interests of black people if these black faces in high places are trying to survive or trying to use reformism in order for themselves to survive. When we make asinine statements like defund the police, rather than decentralization of public safety and community control of public safety, that recognizes that we do have power on a local level, that we do have political power on a local level. The Republicans and the right wing realize that all politics is local. That's why they're taking over community school boards and taking over local legislations, local legislators, in order to put in place their strategic visions, their protections. And on the other hand, we have our misleaders who are selling us out with leaders
with movements by victimhood. You know, we have leadership by victimhood. We're led by the victims of police brutality. They're the ones that determine the nature of our resistance. You see, we have the pork chop preachers and reformers and the people and these Negroes in the Congressional Black Caucus, you know, who are silent on U.S. bombings and killings and drone attacks in Africa and in across the Middle East, and they're loudly proclaiming their solidarity with the government in its murder of Palestinians, in support of the European settler state of Israel, in support of U.S. sanctions against Venezuela, and sanctions against Cuba, sanctions against anybody that threatens the hegemonic ambitions of the United States. So we have these Negro leaders sitting, these Negro representatives sitting in Washington, you know, who are carrying out basically international form of gentrification. Supporting international gentrification, if you want to use that term, that's being unwound and initiated and used in our communities every day. We know there's gentrification going on in every Black domestic colony in America, whether it's Chicago, New York, the Bay Area. Gentrification is an engine, is a result of the real estate, the concentration of money and power in corporate real estate interests in the U.S. You know, so
that was a real nice nice term for a brutal reality. You know, it was nice of you to say international gentrification. You know that.
And well, I mean, it's when we look at you know, I live in Ghana. And when you you know, some of they put up roadblocks at night in Ghana, and you know, to check people and stuff like this. It's very regimented in respects like that. But when you look at the equipment of the police, I mean, they have the exact same, you know, bulletproof vests. I mean, they might have the second generation, you know, the earlier one. I mean, first generations, but they're wearing all of their equipment. All of their equipment is made in the U.S.
Right.
Their weapons are made in the U.S. Their flak jackets, everything that they're. I mean, they just look like U.S. They just got a Ghanaian flag on their shoulder. But right. You could have changed the flag. If you changed the flag and put American flag, you wouldn't tell the difference. You know, just looking at them. So we need to understand that America has gentrified law enforcement around the world. The arms industry in America. When we talk about something like gun control. When we talk about the arms industry in the United States is the #1 purveyor of weaponry and weapons in the world. And almost every alliance that the United States engages in comes with a huge multi-billion-dollar arms contract. And we ask ourselves, so who's making these missiles? It's Raytheon. Who's making these fighter planes? It's Boeing, McDonnell Douglas. It's these corporations. Then we look around in the Black community. Well, there's no Raytheon plants in Harlem, in New York, in Chicago. There's no arms manufacturing like Remington and the ones that's making all of these guns and making these M1 tanks and all of this. So who's making all of this? This is a major source of finance and wealth for the United States. And it's no coincidence that the United States could pass a multi-billion-dollar military budget, but quibble over universal health care and fight over debt forgiveness for students. Anything that benefits the ordinary consumer, the working class consumer, is a struggle. It's something that has to be debated. But the military and the police, they get a carte blanche. They get whatever they want. So when we have young people who don't understand their radical history and don't relate to their radical traditions and don't understand, you know, exactly how far we've come, they would popularize slogans like defund the police. Now, you know, anybody that studied fascism and studied the police state or authoritarian states will know that the police are not going to be defunded by the elite. I mean, that's just, if anything, they're going to give them more money.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly why, when you elect a senile cracker like Biden to the presidency, raise him up because you say, well, he's better than Trump and he makes white folks feel comfortable because he's a senile old man, semi-senile old man, and he comes out with this real militant rhetoric about he ain't defunding nothing. In fact, he's gonna give them more money,
right?
And they're gonna get more military equipment, and so we need to really understand what this means, that America is run and controlled by white men with guns. I mean, you can't make it no simpler than that. Right. You haven't got a black politician in America that doesn't have to appease the police unions in order to get elected.
That's right.
He has to be tough on law and order. He has to be a supporter of these major reactionary right-wing police associations and unions. So the police have more political clout in Congress and in local affairs than the black community does, with the plethora of black leaders that we do have in America today. We have more black leaders, more black elected officials, I should say, in office than we've ever had in our history, and we have less power. We have no political control over the armed agents of the state. And I just want to say this, that the same way that the U.S. military functions as part of U.S. diplomacy and abroad, the police departments of the United States function in the same way in terms of domestic policies in the U.S. They are there. The police are in our communities and in our cities to serve and protect, to serve the interests of the rich and the property owners, and protect their property and interests in our community. They're not in our community to serve and protect us. Fighting crime is only incidental to their major function. Their major function is to protect the system and the power elite that control this capitalist system. And if we understand that, then we understand basically that the armed agents of the state, the police, are not workers. Right. They're not ordinary consumers. They are armed agents of the state, but they enjoy the privileges and extra privileges of unionization, of collective bargaining. Although they can't go on strike, they're forbidden to go on strike, and that tells you right there that they're not workers. Workers can strike. Workers can demand wage changes and changes in their conditions of employment. The police can't do that. Right. So they've devised different methodologies to show their displeasure whenever there's political decisions that affect them. So they have the blue flu, and they got work stoppages, right. But they can't go on strike. So right. Reason why I'm bringing this to this point is that when we talk about how do we rethink policing in America, it's not just about reforming these institutions. It's about abolishing them. And when we say abolishing them, people say, well, you got to have police. You got to have some type of mechanisms of control in society. Otherwise, people go buck wild and kill each other, and there's no accountability. When we talk about abolishing policing, what we're talking about is abolishing the political control of the armed agents of the state over the social and political development in our community and our safety. So what we're talking about, we're not talking about abolishing public safety. We're talking about changing the nature of public safety and making it more socialist orientated, making it more amenable to the conditions of the people that they're policing. And so they're trying to do this with various programs now. The police know what time it is. They know the writing's on the wall. So they're coming out with these innovative so-called reforms now, where they have psychiatrists and social workers being deployed with police units and all of this stuff. But that's not changing the relationship between the police and the state. The police in America are the armed agents of white supremacy. They're the armed agents of the national security state. And so they are not workers. And if we want to begin to change the face of policing in America, we have to understand that that's their role, and we have to go straight ahead and have these unions, these police unions, decertified. We should have a class, we should build a national movement to decertify these 5 or 6 major police unions, because it's the police unions in the final analysis that exert the political power in our communities, that have them killing us and getting away with murder, that have them enjoying so-called immunity, a qualified immunity, and all of these different extra constitutional privileges that they enjoy. And they enjoy these privileges because they have the power of life and death in their hands, because they are armed agents of the state.
Right. For clarity, for clarity, when you talk about, and not to cut you off, when you talk about abolition, right? What are the limitations? Because you have some folks that are confused into thinking that when you're talking abolition, that you are talking about possibly, only going as far as Fred Douglass. You know what I'm saying? Or asking for permission to be released. What are when you saying go straight ahead? When you're talking about decertification of the police associations and unions and whatnot. What does that mean in layman terms for folks who are just, like you talking about? I mean, what does that mean? Break it down.
Well, what it means is when we talk about something as simple as community control of police, this is not just having a community activists and community leaders sitting on some community civilian complaint review board reviewing. That's not what we're talking about. Right. We're talking about the same way they're talking about, the same way that the right and white supremacist organizations like the Republican Party gerrymander political districts so that they could control the votes of Black people and minorities, so-called national minorities in any given area. They do that so they could stay in power. Okay, when we talk about community control of police, we're talking about districts where the community elects and selects and elects their own public safety officers, the ones that control public safety in their community. This doesn't abolish the police learning how to police professionally, going to police academies and learning the techniques of policing and civilian maintaining civilian law and civilian order. We're not talking about just no cops on the streets at all and everybody just run buck wild. That's not what's being said here. What's being said is that if the police are armed agents of the state, then they don't have our interests at heart. They have the state's interests at heart. And we know that corporate money and corporate funding control the politics of America. They control both political parties in America. We don't have an independent political party, so therefore we don't have grassroots organizations that are independent of the influence of the Democratic and Republican Party. So every Negro that's in the Democratic Party is in the Democratic Party to protect themselves, to protect their own interests, to protect their power. They're not in the Democratic Party to actually project the power of the Black community because we don't have no political party. We don't have a third political force. We are subjected to the paradigms and the definitions of our oppressor, the Republican and Democratic parties. So, having said that, when we talk about community control of police and decentralization of police, we know that in most urban areas, the police chief is appointed by the mayor or the head of the city council or whoever. They're usually appointed by the mayor. So the mayor picks someone from the ranks of the police department or whatever to be his in effect, his armed goon. He's the one that controls the police in the city, and that police chief determines, the so-called discipline and organization of policing. This is why we have in New York, we have a cop former cop that's a mayor. And he's bringing back all of the policies and all of the programs that failed in the past. And he's talking about, but this time we're going to put a police jacket on the undercover cops, so that when they kill you now, when they pull you over and they murder you, they got a jacket on, so you know they was identifiable, you see. But nothing has changed. But when we talk about community control of police, we're talking about each district, each congressional district, whether it's congressional, whether it's a local district, each district having its own public safety board and public safety officer, who then commands or commands the police in that district. Because every neighborhood, many neighborhoods in various cities have different needs for policing. Some neighborhoods may have a uptick in drugs and drug trafficking, so they require a certain type of policing. Other neighborhoods might be less, so they might be more residential, and they might suffer from break-ins and house robberies and burglaries. So that's another type of policing. But the community needs to determine the policies in the policing policies in their community, and be able to fire and hire police, be able to censor police for misconduct. And there should be residency clauses for the police, at least for the first few years of after they graduate from the academy. They should live in the community that they assigned to in police, which means that housing has to be set aside for public safety. So public safety personnel, public safety officers will be able to get affordable housing in the communities that they police, you know. And whereas this might not be, such a policy may not be feasible, say, in a commercial area, you know, a downtown area where there's stores and there's shops and there's actually nobody living there. That's a whole different type of policing. Okay, so what I'm getting at is that when we rethink community control of police, we think about the police as being those individuals in the community who live with us, who have to undergo the same types of problems that everybody else does. That means that, but that's not possible with a union that's run by these rabid racists. Most of these individuals who are running these unions are rabid racists and right-wing zealots, you know, and who view crime and violence as an excuse to mobilize themselves militarily, to get more guns, more support, you know, for murders, for so-called controlling violent felons. So when you have a cop come in to New York and say there's an uptick in gun violence in the city, so now they're going to deploy cops to search people's backpacks on the subways, to stop people in the streets and question them. So all of your rights, all of your civil rights are being curtailed in this effort to so-called to curtail crime.
Right, they're like local Israeli checkpoints and shit. Just the same.
Yeah. I mean that's the same program, and so we know that, you know, most of the stop and frisk, most of the killings of innocent unarmed Black people have occurred over minor violations, traffic light violations, you know, tail light out, you know, speeding, you know, jaywalking, selling loosies, all of these things that don't require a cracker with a 9mm.
Right.
Okay. Right. Who after he blows your brains, I tell you, he was scared to death. Right. I was scared for my life, but the guy was unarmed.
Knee in your neck. Right.
Yeah, I was the person he shot was unarmed. He shot him 15 times at point blank range, or he was running away when he shot him, but he feared for his life. Well, if he's that much of a bitch ass punk, he don't need to be a cop. Okay, and so we really need to understand that recruiting policemen, okay, should be part of the community process, the community should be involved in this, because we know many of these policemen, you know, after they lowered the height requirement, you have little guys that, you know, that want to be bullies. You have these little nerds and these twerks, you understand, they got a badge and a gun now. So now, you know, you're supposed to listen to everything they say, even though they don't know what they be saying half the time. Most of them don't even know the law, and they went to the police academy. They hardly know the Constitution. This is why. So we need to understand that policing comes from the community. You know, the Constitution talks about a well-regulated militia. You know, that the people should raise. That's what the Second Amendment is supposed to be about.
Right.
Okay. But the only ones that recognize the Second Amendment in those terms is white folks. And they recognize it to protect their white privilege. Okay. So this is why you see we have in America a right wing that's armed to the teeth, and they have political power, and they have infiltrated the police and military. And in the Black community, we're talking about, you know, gun giveaways, and we're talking about illegal guns and all this stuff. When we know, buy back guns. But we also know that for the past 20 years, Stop and Frisk gave hundreds or thousands of young Black men and women criminal records to prevent them from even owning a weapon because of those little charges on their record. So the black community is completely vulnerable to the violence of white supremacy, both extrajudicial and judicial, and we have no way to defend ourselves. And so when we talk about an abolitionist movement, we're talking about a movement that abolishes the ability or the power of the police to murder us, to intimidate us, to control us and take that control into our hands. So abolition doesn't mean the abolishment of law enforcement. It means that we should take control of our own communities and enforce the law ourselves, and in fair and equitable terms. And so that the courts and everything that follow behind that has to be radically changed. So when we talk about abolition, we're talking about abolishing the white supremacist construct that created policing in America, that created the judiciary in America, and rather than reforming these institutions that, in my view, cannot be reformed because that's not their purpose. That's not why they were created. They were created to control us. They were created to dominate us, and they was created to suppress working class interests. And you can't reform that because you don't have the type of wealth and control of labor that would be required to bring about fundamental institutional reforms.
Let me ask you this: Why do you feel like? I'm thinking about, you know, when we was talking about the whole the whole defund the police piece, right? I'm thinking about. I remember some years ago we were on a panel with, and I don't know if you remember this cat that was on the
Civilian Complaint Review Board.
Absolutely.
In Atlanta, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So he had no answers to anything. They were toothless. In fact, I don't know if you remember, they put up some billboards out here talking about don't run. You know what I'm saying? And then they had the whole hands up, don't shoot, and the dying situation. Why do you feel that our people? I mean, a two-part question. For one, why do you feel that this whole sloganeering thing is thought of as a solution opposed to what it is? And secondly, when you talk about building a third party, what are your thoughts on independent parties like the Green Party? You know, is it effective, impactful, or what's, you know, give us some feedback on that.
Well, to take the first question first, any movement, any mass movement that's aimed at empowering masses of people or mobilizing masses of people has to uses slogans to simplify the ideas behind that mass movement. This is why in the 60s, the Black Panther Party used power to the people, right, knowing that the enemy could not use power to the people as a slogan. What were they going to say? Power to the pigs? Right. You see, what were they going to say? Power to the police? Right. So they couldn't use that. But everybody on the progressive side could use it. They could say power to the people, Black power to Black people. Brown power to brown people, working class power, power to workers. These things could be used. So popularizing slogans is a form of simplifying ideas and the strategic vision of a movement, of a coherent people's movement. And so this generation, of course, not having been in touch with their own radical history, they're reinventing failure. So what they do is when a black man is murdered with his hands up, they think, well, hands up, don't shoot.
Right.
But they fail to realize the hands up is the universal sign of surrender.
Absolutely.
So if you're marching down the street with your hands up and you're saying don't shoot, you've already surrendered.
Right. You already lost.
You basically saying that, you know, I got my hands up, don't shoot, when we know that the police will shoot you with your hands up. So what's the point? You see? So it's a generation that doesn't understand the value of slogans in mass movements. And so when you have people who after the death of Trayvon Martin decide to popularize the slogan or feel that, you know, their emotions feel that Trayvon was just, you know, his life didn't matter, so Black Lives Matter. You know, Black lives has never mattered in white supremacist America. I mean, that's so saying Black Lives Matter, who are you trying to convince? White folks who know Black lives don't matter, or are you trying to convince ourselves that our lives matter?
Like saying the sky blue or some shit.
Yeah. I mean, if we really felt that our lives matter, and this is who we was trying to convince, we would shoot back. And we will let them crackers know that my life matters. And if there's going to be funerals, they're going to be funerals on both sides. If we're going to have democracy in America, we're going to have a democratic distribution of this pain. Sure. You see? Sure. So without a democratic distribution of the pain, there's no possibility for justice in the courts. Okay, because we the only ones suffering. We the only ones getting shot. We told don't run away. When was we was told not to run away during the bullwhip days in slavery. The crackers said you better not run away.
Right.
And so we wanted, it's gonna be worse. So it was like, feet don't fail me now. Right. I'm out of here. Right. You know, just knees move for me. You
Chop
see,
my foot off, I'm still running.
Yeah. I'm hobbling on one foot. You see what I'm saying? And so how are we gonna? We told not to run, and we told to hold up, put our hands up. Don't make no sudden moves. I mean, this is. I mean, you see this in the cowboy movies, man. At Tombstone. Okay, partner, don't make no sudden moves now. Right. You understand? Don't go and you know how the slick kid, you know, on the block, you know, the new gunslinger, he would make the fake move to his gun, right, you know, right, to get the old man to draw, right, so he could shoot him down. Yeah. Like, this is what these crackers do. So I mean, so we.
You remind me of my grandfather with that. He told me back in the day, he said, look, always carry two knives. What you do, he said, drop one on the ground, so when they reach to get it, you go ahead and slice their throat with the other. So to this day.
Well, he made sense. You see, but what I'm getting at, slogans are very important to any mass movement. So slogans should be really, really thought out, not some spontaneous emotional response to in the moment. And right, and then when you talk of, and then getting to the issue of a third party, you know, in Gary, Indiana, we convened a Black Power, a Black Party, a Black convention to formulate a Black political party, and over 50 years ago, and it was the Jesse Jacksons and the so-called Negroes who would later populate the Black and Puerto Rican, the Black caucus in Congress. They were the ones that said this was premature, that we should exercise. It was too early for us to leave the Democratic Party. We need to exercise whatever power we can within the Democratic Party, because it's an institutional party, and we could transform it. So from that point on, and I mean, before then, we were always voting for the lesser of two evils.
So they basically co-opted is what you eat.
Oh yes, they sidetracked it. And so the lesser of two evils is still evil, you see. And so the idea of a third political party could never take off, you see. But actually, the third political party is a Black political party, or what I would say a multiracial political party, a rainbow coalition that would evolve into a political party with Black leadership, with third world leadership, with working class leadership, would have been a dynamic factor right now in the United States because of the corporate the influence of corporate money in the electoral process, the influence of white males with guns in the electoral process. I mean, we got senators right now. We got Muffy and this other Bobbitt, this pointed head. She's posed up. She's posed up on a podcast with AK-47s behind her. Her whole family's around the Christmas tree with AR-15s and stuff. The other one is talking about, she's going to Congress strapped. I mean, this is Muffy. These are some white women, you understand, who's like feeling themselves.
That's right.
Hard
body. Right.
Right. They on it like, and what do we have? We got sisters singing about, we need to trust in Jesus. We need to get a new civil rights bill, and we're gonna march across the Pettus Bridge. We're gonna remember Martin. Right. Yeah, I mean, this is what we got on, this is what we got. And I mean, back in the day, man, I know if my mama was alive, she slapped the taste out of one of these white women's mouth talking that yik yak shit in front of her.
That's right.
You understand?
Right.
But I mean, we don't have no sisters. If we do have sisters like that, they're being outcast and they're being demonized because because we
know some, but they,
yeah, we know some, and they, and they're not the, they're not the go soft type like Beyonce and them. They're not right. On it like that.
Right.
You got some sisters that'll slam dunk a jive person, somebody that's faking in the game. You see, but these are not the Fannie Lou Hamers aren't our leaders today.
Right.
The Fannie Lou Hamers wasn't good, but Fannie Lou used to be strapped.
Right. And I think that's the thing too, like what you're talking about. Those who will get physical, for lack of better words, they're not allowed near the podium or damn near the building itself, because they know that they're not going along with whatever's politically correct. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
They came for the blood, and that's just it, like you said.
I mean, you have to have people. Any people that want liberation, they have to have a segment of their society that is willing to step forward and to protect the integrity of their community. This is about the integrity, the social, political, and economic integrity of our community. As long as the white supremacists know that they could victimize us, that we have no redress except through their system of accountability, then they will run amok, and they have run amok, and they will do whatever they want to. We do have a human right to self-defense. Right. And that hasn't been taken from us by the Constitution of the United States. In fact, it's been enshrined in the Constitution of the United States. But we have been told that we cannot win by exercising our right to self-defense, that we cannot organize ourselves into well-regulated militias in our community under the color of law and win, okay? So we have people in our community who are afraid of freedom. They are afraid of the uncertainty that freedom has, and they're comfortable with the certainty of oppression. At least they know that, we can't do this and we can't do that, so we have to, get out and demonstrate, and so when we talk about something like a third political party, we're talking about mobilizing the forces in the United States that will soon be the majority in this country. The demographics in this country is showing that white Christian males are soon going to go the way of the buffalo.
Extinct.
You see, and that the United States will be a multiracial and multi-ethnic society. So what is the role of Black people in this? Look what's going to happen in the wake of Ukraine. Watch all these Ukrainians come into the United States, get some money, start some businesses, and before you know it, they'll be following Black black folks around in the shopping market, talking, you know, and exercise. Yeah, joining the police department and all of that, talking about their best friend, you know, was a cop that fought with them against the Russians in the Ukraine.
And the same niggas that was crying for him now would be getting slapped upside their head. On Main Street.
So people don't understand that a third political party, you know, is something that has to be organized according, given the history of oppression in this country by the marginalized, by working people, by poor people. They have to represent these constituents. And so when we look at something like the Green Party that evolved over the last over the decade or so, you know, it came out of a progressive sentiments, anti-war sentiments, anti-fossil fuel, you know, not, you know, it came from progressive white activists to form a third political party. And it's had a hard time even getting on the ballot in many states, but it's persevered. So the Green Party was always a progressive movement, was always attempting to try to offer up a different viewpoint, a different view, and a different strategic vision of politics in America. It was always it was anti-fossil fuel, it was it was pro-environmental, it was anti-racist, it was working class, but the Green Party could never take off like it did in Europe, because here in the United States you have an electoral college system. Right. An electoral college system was created to make sure that the masses of people could never take the property and the wealth and the political clout of those who had power and property. So this is why you could win the popular vote and lose, and I mean, you could have a majority of people vote for one candidate and a minority elect the actual president by the electoral college system. In fact, Donald Trump and his minions were attempting to hijack the last election using the weakness of the electoral college system, you see. And so we need to understand that there's no true democracy in America with an electoral college system. Winner takes all. Now, in Europe, the Green Party, you know, can be a large party and they might just get 15% of the vote, which guarantees them a voice in the opposition in parliaments. Okay, so they're not just like out of it. They don't have they have influence. In fact, if a coalition has to be put together in order for a ruling party a party that might get, say, 35% of the vote, okay, and you have another party that gets 15 and another party that gets 20, it has to form a coalition with these other parties and commit to these other parties certain concessions. For instance, they might appoint the minister of women's affairs might come from the Green Party. The minister of transportation might come from the Social Democrats. Okay, even though the party that won power might have been a center of road or right wing party, it has to have a coalition. But in America, it's not like that. In the electoral college system, the winner with electoral votes, the winner takes all. And so that's how a buffoon like Donald Trump, a con man like Donald Trump, an idiot like Donald Trump, a dumbass white boy could become the commander-in-chief of the United States military and the president of the United States, to the shame of white folks. White folks can't get over the fact that they elected this idiot.
I mean,
so
I'm still stunned because, you know, we lived in that area, that region where he was a buffoon for decades before he became.
Everybody knew.
Yeah. So
everybody.
So I think that the thing that's closest to him, we would have never thought that Al Sharpton would have been taken serious, nor Donald Trump, because we always knew he was a conch head, bobblehead. Before he was a bobblehead, you know, we knew that he was a clown. You know what I'm saying? So we couldn't see down the barrel of time and to say that Al Sharpton would be taken serious amongst the masses. You know what I mean? Just like Trump. So I'm gonna blame it on New York. I'm gonna blame it on you
can't
brothers up in the Bronx.
You could blame it on you could blame it on the boogie if you want to, but
y'all could have stopped that shit back.
but no, but
30 years
Sharpton made
ago.
it clear. Sharpton made it clear he was about leadership by victimhood.
Yeah, he was clear. I mean,
He
he took Jesse's place. You know what I mean?
And if you notice the so-called last march on Washington that he conducted, he had every relative of almost every black person that was murdered by the police up on the podium. This is leadership by victimhood.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so, you know, we had, you know, victims. These are victims, and these are families that lost their loved ones.
Right.
To the violence of the white supremacist racist police state.
Being pimped.
Okay.
Right.
And all they could get is a settlement.
Right.
You might get one or two convictions, or the police get dismissed, but basically there was no accountability. And so it was these people that were put forward. They're on the radio programs. They're telling people, well, you know, we understand that people should come out and we should wait for the system to do its course, but let's not have no violence. Let's not burn down anything. You see, so they then determine the parameters of the issue. The debate is the victim.
Right.
You know, it's like people would tell you about, you know, they put up signs and they say that George Floyd, you know, changed this and he changed that. George Floyd was a victim of wanton police murder. He wasn't a political activist. He wasn't a political activist when he was murdered. His family didn't have an ounce of politics and was thinking about nothing about getting involved in any type of movement. Right. He was a victim.
Now we leave it.
So, and so, you know, we should be outraged by his murder. By all means, we should have empathy and sympathy and solidarity with his family. But his family's sentiments and lack of politics shouldn't direct the dynamics of our movement.
Right.
You see?
Right.
So victims don't lead movements. Once they step up to become a revolutionary, become an activist, they're no longer victims.
That's right.
Okay.
Right.
Victims are only people who remain victims, and that's where the Sharptons and all of these the Crumps. I mean, when was the last time Crump won a case? He has never won a case.
I mean,
all he gets is settlements.
Right.
All he gets is settlements.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? And all he gets is settlements. He never won a case. Right. And so the reason why, you know, they can say something like in the Ahmaud Arbery case, where these crackers were convicted. You know, I mean, it was obvious to a donut, to a duck, that they hunted this man down and killed him. Yeah. And the cracker that filmed it, he was filming it to show, you know, that they was right.
Right. It
you know,
it was a straight.
Yeah, but
I mean, they did what they did to Trayvon. I mean, the same thing.
Yeah, and so we see that when we look at that. And then we knew that was coming, that conviction was coming. And so so it was almost all white jury. I think they had one black person on the jury that came back with the conviction. And the first thing Sharpton says at the press conference is this is a monumental victory, because it shows that white people can come to the conclusion that a black person was murdered unjustly by racists. I mean, come on, man.
I mean, shit.
I mean, this
is 8, and she came to that conclusion.
I mean, come on, man. And then you had the Rittenhour. A situation where a white boy traveled across state lines with an illegal weapon and killed 2 white protesters.
Right.
Okay. Now these were white folks in solidarity with black people.
Right.
Okay.
And
then you would have and then you would have certain elements of supposedly woke folks talking about, well, these were, you know, this was a white boy killed other white boys.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Whereas I know from my experience that some of my strongest comrades in alliance with us were white comrades. Some of them were even LGBTQ, white comrades. You understand? Back in the 60s, they were on the front line. Who were the weathermen? You understand? Right. Who was the FALN? They weren't all pitch black. They wasn't the BLA. So we had white folks who took seriously the idea and the notion of liberation and working class freedom and the independence of black people. These were our allies. These were solid allies. So we need to understand that, you know, although white supremacy is the overarching context or the cockpit of capitalism in this society, that this society is a capitalist society with definite class interests and class divisions that we have to pay attention to. So it's very important that if we talk about a third political party, we have to talk about a third political party that's led by the most radical a segment of society, the most oppressed segment of society, and that would be people of African ancestry and poor people. That we have to have
Lowndes County Party. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the People's Campaign led by Reverend Barber, I mean, this is a campaign that includes masses of working class people, indigenous people, poor people, all types of people in this campaign to change the moral and ethical basis for in America. I mean, this is a organization and a poor people's campaign that took up where Dr. King left off.
Right.
Now, we know that when Dr. King was killed, Jesse and all of them disappeared. Jesse and what's that other bald head dude that died? What's his name?
John Lewis.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Jasper Lewis. You know. John. John Lewis. Yeah. You know him and all of these Negroes. They fled. They left the Poor People's Campaign and pursued their own political careers.
Right.
You see. And so when King was killed and Martin and Malcolm was killed, you know, it created a whole generation of opportunists and cowards who the system then began to elevate and relate to, you know. So we wound up with them instead of a third political party. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. died in Memphis, Tennessee, fighting for the rights of garbage men.
Right.
Garbage men.
Serious.
Sanitation workers.
Right.
Huh? And so when we understand that, we understand the basis for a third political party are poor, working class, marginalized people of all ethnic backgrounds and all racial backgrounds. And that we have one thing in common, that we have to be anti-capitalist corporate elite, that we have to build a system that caters to working class people and ordinary people, not a system that's based on our ability to consume and go into debt. So a third political party is still not being talked about. The Green Party in the United States is always going to be somewhat limited in its ability to mobilize and get people because of the electoral college system, and it's a winner-take-all system. It's even hard for them to get on the ballot in certain cities, in certain places. So we don't have a democracy in America. We have democratic fascism. You know, we have. Yeah, that's what we have. We have a garrison state that's run by white men with guns, and we have a political system of democratic fascism.
I want to ask you a couple more questions before we go. I know you got to break out, you know, but two things. One, from the chat, one of the chat members asked, do you recall the name Frankie Zith from Harlem? And if you could share a few thoughts on his activity in politics. That's the first question.
Yeah, I met Frankie Zith in the penitentiary. You know, Frankie Zith started out as a drug addict and drug dealer. You know, he developed his political acumen and commitment in prison. And when he came out, he started to work with prisoner right groups, organizations. Frankie Zith was a good example of how social prisoners can evolve and develop into political activists and political political activists. And so it's very, Frankie Zith, he was a good example of that. And of course we had others that come to mind, that I was in prison with. These were brothers that went into prison, apolitical for social crimes, and during the course of their incarceration, they became politically active and politically aware. And I guess we know that George Jackson is probably the penultimate version of what I'm talking about. You can't get, and for those who haven't read George Jackson, I suggest you read him. George was clear about the class nature of the white American working class. In traditional working class Marxism, the working class is supposed to be the most revolutionary class in industrial society by its very nature. And in America, the white working class has been the most reactionary.
Right on.
There was a point in time in the early period of industrialization between the wars, where the white working class was progressive and revolutionary. It organized unions against the corporate elite, against the robber barons. It fought to protect workers. And many of the activists, the communists, then at the turn of the century and in the early 20s and 30s, they died and were killed because of their attempts to organize workers. But since that time, after the world wars, the unions came under the sway of organized crime and racist political corporate interests, and they have become, basically weakened. They became weakened to the point where when Reagan came along, they were able to be destroyed or completely neutralized. So today we have a weak working class. We have weak unions today, and the strongest union in America is the police, are the unions of the armed agents of the state. They're the strongest unions in the country. Them and those who manufacture the instruments of war, those who make the drones and those types of weapons, they're valued. But these are technicians. These are workers that have a certain expertise, a certain skill set that is quite developed. You can see the depression of the auto industry, the unions, the right to work laws that come in. And look at Detroit now. Now that it's going to get worse as cars become electrified and the wealth gap and it changed and the wealth accumulation of wealth of the wealth from fossil fuel, the accumulation of the wealth that the wealthy have accumulated from fossil fuel is going to change. And so now is the time for unions for workers to unionize with increased alacrity, with increased intensity. We see there's some struggles going on right now with Walmart and with Target, with these unions of these huge companies, these huge marketing companies. So, we are in a very delicate time, a situation, epoch right now. And it's time for working class people, poor people, to begin to organize and mobilize themselves for their own interests and not rely upon the institutional parties to represent them, to represent their interests, because we get sold out every time.
I want to get a final question. I want to take go back in time in history real quick, because of the fact we talk about, we started off talking about the Ukraine and Russia. And one of the things that folks are confused about was that Russia or the Soviet Union was an ally during World War II. why was it so important, and why did they want to neutralize Russia and knock them off the box after World War II?
Well, to make a long story short, the Soviet Union were the major force in the Second World War that destroyed Nazi Germany and their allies. Over 27 million Russians died in World War II, compared with 565,000 Americans. Okay, the Russians fought on their own land in 41 to push the Germans back out of the Soviet Union, and eventually they were the ones that captured Berlin, and Berlin was divided into zones. But now the Soviet Union were allies with Great Britain, the UK, the United Kingdom, Britain, the United States, Canada, and Australia. They were all part of the Allied forces, but the Allies didn't really. They brought to bear the industrial might of the United States, because the United States was never actually attacked physically, as the states, the homeland, was never attacked physically by the enemy. So the United States began to turn out weapons and mass produce armaments to the point where it became the best armed and well armed nation on the planet. And the only one it had a rival with was the Soviet Union at the end of the war. The Soviet Union had already occupied almost all of Eastern Europe, and began to institute socialist governments and communist governments in Poland, in all of Eastern Europe, Hungary, Poland, Czechoslovakia. In all of these nations, the history of these nations, if we go to examine them, we'll see that after the Soviet Union left, they began to change and transform. Yugoslavia broke up, and we had the war in Kosovo and all of that stuff. So the Soviet Union was the only power left standing with the United States at the end of World War II. It was the most powerful country in the world territorially. It had more territory than the United States. And Russia today is the largest nation on the face of the earth. It encompasses almost all of Asia. You see, and so the Soviet Union was never susceptible to coups from the outside, and the U.S. instigating and mobilizing military coups and undercover overthrows of government. It was never that vulnerable, but the leadership in the Soviet Union was always European, even though the major landmass of the Soviet Union was Asian. And so in that sense, the Russians were as much racist and white supremacists as their Western counterparts, but because of their ideology, because of their organization after the collapse of the Tsar in 1918, at the end of World War I, and the rise of the communists, but it was because of the communists and the socialist ideology of the Soviet Union. It was because of that ideology that they reached out to the liberation movements in the colonial South, in the colonized South, in Africa, and in Latin America, and trained many of the soldiers and the revolutionaries in Mozambique, in Guinea-Bissau, in the Congo, in Mauritania. In all of these armed struggles, it was the Soviet Union that provided the training and the logistics and the education for the liberation forces. And it was the United States, on the opposite, that fought their proxy wars in Africa, that financed the Jonas Savimbis and the Mobutus and and these reactionaries that robbed Africa and raped Africa in the name of themselves, And so we really need to understand that the Soviet Union, when it collapsed, it was when Gorbachev agreed to dismantle the Soviet bloc nations. It was weak economically. The United States, the Cold War, had drained the Soviet Union economically, and it was also the fault of the Soviets because they had the ability to actually undermine European and international finance capital. Because at that time, during the collapse, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia and the Soviet Union, before its collapse, were the second largest producer of gold in the world. They had one of the largest gold reserves in the world. And they never used it in the Cold War. Because if they would have dumped that gold on the market, it would have completely destabilized the United States and its disengagement from the gold standard. They could have changed the whole paradigm of international finance capital, and they didn't. And this is one of the criticisms I made of the Soviet Union, that they were state socialists. They were state communists. They never were about genuine socialism for the masses of working people in Russia. They were always looking towards Europe for their cultural and their cultural identity in terms of their ideals, and it was always European. Right. And so when they collapsed, it opened up the floodgates to the West. They began to move the frontiers of NATO closer and closer to Russia. And we need to understand why that was. Why did the European Union come into existence? Well, at the end of World War II, all of the economies of Europe, the former colonial nations, was devastated. They were basket cases. England was bankrupt. Right. France was bankrupt. Italy was bankrupt. All of these nations were bankrupt. And it was the U.S. that through its Marshall Plan, it floated an almost $1 trillion plan to revitalize Western Europe and bring it back up to standards so that it can be the partners to the United States, so that the United States can then exercise its hegemony over the world in the guise and in the pretext of being of the Western civilizational process. So Germany was reunited in 71, 72, around there. Around then. Germany was reunited, and the wall was taken down. It was much later than that. I'm sorry. My bad. 79.
Yeah, I think 79, 80, somewhere around there.
79, 81, yes. 79 to 81. And so, these economies have been revitalized by the United States. And the United States had troops in Western Europe. The United States poured hundreds of millions of dollars into the military structures of these nations, bringing them up to par. The only reason that the French are at the table in the United Nations Security Council is because they developed the bomb. They have a nuclear weapon. Same.
That was 89 with the Berlin Wall. That's right. 89. Yeah.
89. Yeah. Because in my first tour of Europe, in Germany, I had to deal with these fascist gangs from Eastern Europe. That evolved because fascism became fashionable in Eastern Europe because it was opposed to the state, to the communist state. But so young people, well, they took to right-wing fascism, in opposition to the repression and the rigidity of the Soviet bloc nations. It was because the ideological antithesis of communism in the 30s and in the 20s was fascism.
Right.
So with these weakened economies after World War II, the United States went on a campaign to revitalize them. Some of these nations tried to reclaim their territory, like France. France went into Vietnam to reclaim its territory in Vietnam, and we know how that turned out. They got defeated by Ho Chi Minh at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, and they had to withdraw. The United States then took up the fight for them, even though the United States had supplied the French with this military equipment. We also know what happened in Korea before then, in 1949 and 1950, when it was clear that Kim Il-sung of North Korea and their Soviet backers were poised to take over the whole peninsula of Korea. Okay, because the Japanese occupied Korea during World War II, and when they were defeated, their armies weren't defeated in Korea; they surrendered.
Right.
You see, and it was only in the last days of the war, after they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that the Russians declared war on Japan.
Right.
And moved in to occupy certain territories that the Japanese army had occupied in Malaysia, Malaysia, which has changed its name now, and Korea, and in Nepal, India, all of these places where the Japanese had to surrender, the Russians and the Soviets took over. Right. And so the United States felt that the communism was spreading as a result of the collapse of the British Empire and the French Empire. And so they had to fill the gap. And so the Korean War was that pretext. They brought some slime bag. I think his name was what was his name? They brought him some Koreans. What was his name? His name is on the tip of my tongue. They brought him in to rule over South Korea, in order to thwart the communist takeover of Korea, which led to the Korean War, and the U.S. Threatening China, moving up the peninsula under MacArthur, threatening China, and the Chinese, came across the Yalu River en masse and forced the Americans back to the 38th parallel. And it's been that way ever since. The Korean War is still is not over. Right. It's been declared. It's been declared a deadlock. It's an armistice, something like that. But it's not over. There's right. Still the demilitarized zone. The U.S. still has troops in Korea and in Japan. So after the Korean War, that was actually the first real military. A defeat of the U.S. military after World War II. Right. Then came Vietnam, and that long protracted struggle in Vietnam, and Vietnam practically tore the United States apart. The right. Vietnam, it radicalized the whole generation of white youth. It radicalized African Americans in the United States. The Black Panther Party, for instance, had a working coalition and alliance with the NLF and North Vietnamese. It was the same throughout Europe in terms of the Black Panther Party had solidarity with the Palestinians. They had solidarity with the movements in Africa. So the Black Panther Party, when we had our offices in Algeria, were the crossroads of many of the liberation movements in Africa, met and worked with the Black Panther Party consulate in Algeria. So solidarity between movements was very important for Black nationalists then, for the Black Power movement then.
Not to cut you, but do you think that and I know we're cutting, but do you think that Malcolm's work traveling abroad and meeting with heads of state, do you think that it provided a inroad for folks like Dewey and Eldridge and Stokely and other to come through?
Absolutely, because it was Malcolm. It was Malcolm in his journeys to Africa that understood the decolonization process at that time, and that understood that there was a link between what was happening in Africa and what was happening in America to Black people who were engaged in the struggle for human rights in the United States. And it's very important to understand that, you know, when we talk about, I know you got Baba Zach Kondo coming on,
Yes,
and recently you did a few programs on his assassination. Many people, many of us are fixated with who killed Malcolm and not why he was killed.
right.
And Malcolm was killed precisely because of what you're talking about. When Malcolm met with Nkrumah and Ahmed Ben Bella, and he met with the leaders, he met with Julius Nyerere, he met with the revolutionaries of that time, an unprecedented
Lumumba
generation.
as well, correct or no? Did he?
No,
Lumumba was assassinated.
He was. I believe Lumumba was assassinated in '61.
Right. Yeah, 61.
But what I'm getting at is Malcolm was one of the first, and because he was Muslim,
right,
he was one of the first activists, you know, and I'm not saying he was the first. Paul Robeson and others, Padmore,
Russia and all over the place, right.
Yeah, Paul and Padmore and others had always, Marcus Garvey, have always exhibited a clear understanding that our struggle in the United States was tied to the struggle of oppressed people in the third world, in Africa. But the problem with the struggles in Africa and the decolonization process that Malcolm ran into was that the Cold War was at its height.
Right. And
the Cold War was a war between two polarities, the Soviets and the Americans on one side, and the Soviets on the other. And this polarity forced the third world, people of color, people in the Southern Hemisphere, to form the non-aligned movement. You know, and if you go back and research and listen to the speeches of the non-aligned movement, they talk about global white supremacy. They talk about the racist nature of the colonizers, and they talk about how how the third world is being used as a proxy battlefield for the two superpowers.
Right.
You see, and so they claim to be non-aligned. They were neither pro-American nor were they pro-Soviet. They were pro-African. Right. You see. And so the non-aligned movement was a very important movement. And when Malcolm came along and realized, and given his analysis and his relationships, realized that this whole process of non-alignment, of people of color coming together to fight imperialism and the former colonized colonial nations, all white supremacist nations, you know, was key to changing the global paradigm of the world. And this was very important because we need to understand why institutions like the International Monetary Fund, how it came into existence, the World Bank, how it came into existence, the United Nations, how did it come into existence, and why did and how did the permanent members of the Security Council winding up being the permanent members of the Security Council? What was the purpose of the United Nations? All of these things came into fruition immediately in the decade after the Second World War, when the United States was basically the most powerful country in the world. Okay, and so to sum it up, by the late 1950s, when Eisenhower left office, when President Eisenhower left office, and you got to remember Eisenhower was first a general. He was the commander-in-chief of the Allied Expeditionary Forces in Europe fighting the Nazis. Okay, so when Eisenhower left office, he gave his historic speech, this speech about the military-industrial complex. And this was the first time that the American people really realized that behind the Cold War had arisen this military corporate industrial complex, this multi-trillion-dollar complex that made a business out of war, that needed war or the threat of war in order to make money. And that this militarism that was behind corporate wealth and corporate advancement was influencing U.S. foreign policy to the point where U.S. foreign policy under the Dulles brothers, if you look back on those days, they were about assassinating leaders. They were about overthrowing governments. They assassinated Mossadegh in Iran and installed the Shah. And we know how that ended. That ended with the Islamic Republic of Iran, decades later. And they assassinated Lumumba. They assassinated Amilcar Cabral. The Portuguese assassinated him. So we can go down the list of all of the nations that the United States had murdered their leaders and installed their proxies. I think it's over 67 countries.
Right.
So the United States foreign policy began to rely more and more on military hegemony, on military power. And that's why NATO became so important and key to the United States, because NATO was a combined force of all of the European militaries who were former colonial masters, former colonizers. So I'm saying that World War II, the end of World War II, marked the change of global power and humanity's direction in an unprecedented way. And we're still undergoing the impact and the consequences of what happened at the end of that war.
The wild thing about what you're saying too, that's really gangster, besides your ringtone, is the fact that they all of their criminals, all of our enemies, they rub them in our faces as if like you take a dog and rub his face and shit to tell him to go use the bathroom outside or whatever. Mm-hmm. They name airports after them, they name bridges after them, and warships and all of that type shit. And it's like we are so conditioned with it that it's it's we've accepted it. You know what I'm saying? So we refer to Dulles Airport. We refer to, as you talked about earlier, the Edmund Pettus Bridge and all this other bullshit. And it's their level of insanity and our level of what do you call it? When you forget, when we have the
cognitive dissonance,
amnesia, right, cognitive amnesia, so on and so forth. It's like we forgot who just fucked us up. Like, oh, okay, that's cool.
No, it's not that we forgot. We've accepted it, and then we're told to move on. Right. Yeah, we're told to move on, and we shouldn't dwell on that. That this is now and that is then. But you only got now because of then. Right. And one of the things that we should pass is that much of the things that we take for granted today were instituted at a time when people weren't looking. They weren't really looking, and we have been brainwashed to believe since the bullwhip days that if we fight crackers and we resist, that we can't win.
Right.
So we try to devise all of these mechanisms and all of these strategies to make white folks feel good about themselves and therefore grant us a contract with humanity. Right. You see, and so I mean, we make movies about how we got to make white people feel comfortable.
That's right.
You understand, in the workplace, but we don't understand how that works geopolitically and how that works and how that has a detriment. How that's a detriment to us exercising our right to political power, our sovereignty. We don't think as a sovereign people. We think as a minority, as a national minority who's been wronged by society, by white society, and therefore, if we given a chance, we could be just as good as everybody else at doing what white folks do. Right. Okay, so we celebrate the first Negro, this, and the first Negro this, and we first celebrate, and we still celebrating first.
Right. And we
Okay.
celebrate the ass whoopings too. I mean, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. You
Right.
know, and because of that, you know, we have become incapable of thinking independently in our own interests.
Right.
We feel that if we think in our own interests, we got to consider everybody else's attitude and their interests.
Right.
You know, you know, I grew up with, you know, I grew up on the mantra, you know, that when people mess over you, you don't get mad, you get even.
That's right.
You know, and when's the last time we got even?
Man,
You know,
okay,
when's the last time we held these people to a consequence and said, well, if you do this to our community, this is what's going to happen to you. And you don't want that. And if you think that, you know, because if we look at the Europeans, the colonizers and the Americans,
right.
you know, they have never went anywhere and to take over anything that you didn't have to kick their ass before they left.
That's right.
To make them leave.
The
only time they go
on every level.
Every level. Look at
a
the only
bar
time,
or a prison
all
cell,
you got
a
to
bar,
do,
whatever. Yeah.
all you got to do is look at the Nobel Peace Prize in order to understand this. All you have to do is look at the Nobel Peace Prize. Every time the Americans had to admit defeat, they gave up the Nobel Peace Prize to two people. They never
Right.
give it to one. They always gave it to two. I think the last one to get a single Nobel Peace Prize might have been Martin Luther King. And no, it was Obama.
Yeah, I think I was going to say Obama.
It was Obama. It was Obama.
Then he declared war 2 weeks later. He declared war like 2-3.
Yeah, that's before he became the bomber in chief.
Right,
that's before
right.
he
I
became
mean, literally
in
2-3 weeks before then. I mean, that motherfucker cold.
Yeah,
he didn't get it cold yet. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you look at the Vietnam War, it was Lee Doc-To that got the Peace Prize, and who was the other one? Was it Kissinger? It was Lee Doc-To. It was Lee Doc-To and Henry Kissinger. When the apartheid regime fell in South Africa, which changed the whole dynamic of the African continent, you know, it was Mandela and Leclerc. You
Right.
see,
The Kurtz.
Yeah. So we need to understand that whenever there's a monumental shift in the historical moment, white folks are going to try to put the best paint on it and characterize it and define it for us.
Yes. Black Lives Matter. Right.
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
look at all the money that came. Look at all the money that came to Black Lives Matter after all those demonstrations in the streets and activists being beat up and murdered. You understand? All of a sudden, you know, you got Black Lives Matter on the back of NFL helmets. You got everybody's talking about it. You see,
listen.
because because the slogan was an oxymoron. You know, white folks didn't mind and black folks never mattered.
Right on.
You see, so it was mind over matter. You see, and so when you say, "Oh, Black Lives Matter," who you telling?
Right.
We mattered when we were property. Then you couldn't kill. I mean, you couldn't. Boy, let one of them slave catchers, you know, kill Mr. Gilmore's property. You take him to court, and he might make him an indentured servant.
Right.
You understand? So, but I lost my money when you killed Jabbo Jones. You know, that was my hardest. That was my hardest worker.
Right.
You understand? And you did what? You crippled him. You crippled me. But now that we no longer property, you shoot on sight. You know, we good to go.
And have the rallies at the same damn time.
That's
you know,
right.
They was in Atlanta, as you know. Folks was getting slapped up, shot down in the middle of the protest. You know what I mean? So you know, and we get caught up in, you know, well, the cop was black, as if, you know, as if
why didn't he?
Right.
Yeah, like why didn't he follow? Why didn't he just follow instructions?
Right. Why didn't he throw his hands up? You know.
Yeah. Why didn't he?
Who told him to go to sleep in that car?
But that's the people that say that is the same ones that would have been snitching on the plantation if we was going to run away, and we let them know. Yeah, they would say, old Jabbo over there, he gonna run away tomorrow night. Right. You know, boss. You know, so I get a little more of them pig feet. You know, he out of here tomorrow. You know, And I mean, so this is the same thing today. You know, why don't you cooperate? Why did you did this and why didn't you do that? You see,
Told you not to run.
and yeah, told you not to run. You know, what you running for if you didn't do nothing?
Why you pull your
You
pants up?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, you can't run if your pants is down.
Right.
You know, which has some practicality.
Right.
You know, or you wear flip flops.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So, but the point is that we have accepted our role as victims. We've accepted our role as universal, as eternal victims.
Right.
You see, and so we have movements that's led by victimhood. And that's what makes it so pathetic, because the enemy knows that. You know, America knows that. They know that. So this is why they make jokes out of it. Is it because I'm black?
Right.
Now that's a joke. That's a joke now. You
Right.
see what I'm saying?
Right.
And so they have reduced our oppression to self flagellation.
Right.
You know, we don't need the enemy to, we don't need white supremacy to tell us that we have no power. We do it to ourselves, because the minute that one of us gets into a beef, you know, the guns is drawn.
Right.
You see, and then when the crackers come along, everybody throw their gun under the car.
Hey man, we've seen some of these characters literally when they see pigs coming, put their guns on the hood or put their guns on top of the damn the roof of the car, the top of the car, you know, and back away from it. I got a legal gun. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like, you motherfuckers are crazy.
Because black folk, because the thing that the terror that has been inculcated in white society since its inception was black men with guns.
Right on.
That has been a terror. You know, every plantation owner had that terror that their slaves were going to rise up and slide in and cut their throats and chop their head off.
Right.
And, you know, and if you look at the Civil War, during the Civil War, black Union soldiers were never captured. They were killed when they were captured.
Right.
They were mutilated and murdered. Okay. So when a black man fought for what he thought was his freedom against the Confederates, he knew that he might not get out of that alive, and that if he got captured, he might as well say that last bullet for himself, because they were going to torture him, they were going to kill him.
Damn right.
You see?
Damn right.
And so we don't understand that the idea and the notion of black self-defense is translated by white society into terrorism, into adherence to black terrorism and black racism or hatred of white people. It has nothing to do with hating white people. It has to do with loving yourself and despising white supremacy and the privileges that ensue, that come from white supremacy. You know, and so, you know, we've accepted that. You know, we bend over backwards. I mean, look at Joy Reid, just recently on television, said that the blacks in the Ukraine who were being abused and denied access to transportation to get out of the Ukraine, you understand that them calling the Ukrainians racist played into Putin's hands, you know, and so we shouldn't talk about it. We shouldn't look at it like that. You see, this is
right.
And I mean, I saw an interview of Putin. This is just a sidetrack. And I saw an interview of Putin that was taken about a year or two ago, and they were asking him about a certain a Russian that was supposed to been a dissenter, you know, and he was in jail, and they were saying that Putin had no tolerance for dissent, you know, and that he was throwing the opposition and dissenters into prison. And he named this one particular guy. He named two, but one of them, Putin said, well, this individual, this man, he was drunk at a demonstration. He assaulted police, and he was arrested, and the court sentenced him to jail based on that what happened. Had nothing to do with him just being anti-Putin or anti, whatever. He was a drunk who committed an assault on a police officer, and the police took him into custody and arrested him. He said, now, if that was in America, he would have got shot. He said if that was in America, of course, and he was black, he would have got shot.
Right on. And that's without assaulting the police. That's just black, unarmed, sleeping on the couch.
Suspicion of being suspicious.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, we can go on and on to the break of dawn. Always, pleasure to have you on, brother. It's always good.
I just want you to know my computer didn't cut off while we was in the middle of the interview.
That was interesting. You did your headphones did turn Helen Keller on us for a minute.
Yeah, man, I wasn't hearing nothing, man. I said, oh man, this ain't gonna happen again, is it?
I'm like, man, I was like, man, but the service is getting better, so I appreciate that.
Well, I upgraded my operating system, man. So
you left Ghana. That Ghanaian service was
well. That's a whole different thing. That's banned.
Moonlight, right?
This right here, just went dead.
Right.
And it was charging all day, and it just went dead. But I'm on my Mac, I'm not on the HP. Yeah. So it's worked pretty good.
You upgraded. Hey, brother, we definitely appreciate you. We're gonna wrap a little bit later on. Definitely glad to have you and Professor James Small on. Hopefully we'll get y'all both back on together, because I think it was so much more that you all could have tag team on. But of course, you held it down regardless. And we appreciate it on behalf of the chat and the audience. They asking a lot of questions and whatnot. And we're going to give them the answers. This ain't the last time. You'll see them on board. Plenty of books and everything that to check out. If you don't have, look for me in the Whirlwind. Make sure you grab that latest edition as well. Make sure you continue to support the GoFundMe, because we want to make sure that, we keep things on the right side of history with that as well. But yeah, man, give nephew the regards, Dhoruba. And I'm gonna do that. And I gotta answer this call from Africa now, because they've been calling me. I already know what time it is.
I hope nothing happened, man.
Yeah, no doubt, man. We appreciate you, man. And we'll be wrapping in a few.
Okay, man. All right. Power to the people, man. And I appreciate everybody. And again, my thanks to everyone that contributed to the GoFundMe. And it's really humbling to know that so many people cared. And so,
no doubt. See, I told you some people like you.
Yeah, well, I hope
that times throughout the years we wasn't certain.
Yeah, well, man. Yeah. All right, brother. I see you. Take care. Peace. Power to the people, man.
All power to the people. We'll check you out later on, man. You've been checking out Riot Started TV, and we hope that you appreciate what it is we bring to the table. Always a pleasure to have Dhoruba on, and it was definitely an honor to have Baba James Small on again as well. Look out for the 1-year anniversary of Riot Started TV. That's going to be taking place on March 31st, right here on this channel, the 1-year anniversary of Riot Started TV. And please continue to support all our efforts, because, we want to make sure that we continue to bring you what it is we've been bringing you, but we want to bring it to you even stronger. And we know that on some of these platforms, they only going to tolerate it so long. So we want to make sure that we have all the equipment that we need. So make sure you support our Patreon, become a member of our channel, and keep on running with us, man. I know some of you all think it's an easy road, but nah, not at all. We just make it look that way. You know what I'm saying? But stay on point, stay ready for revolution, and it's war without terms. Riot Started TV, Black Power Media, we out.
Thank you.